Hello and welcome to Japan Expert Insights and our Business Insights Room. Every Thursday, Tim Sullivan and I, Mai Matsuoka, lead a discussion looking for insights, developments, and new opportunities for the business in Japan. In this podcast, we welcome comments, questions, and opinions. So if you haven't done so yet, join us next time. In the meantime, you can find us at japanexpertinsights.com and our YouTube channel, where we upload all the discussions on Japanese politics, business insights, and Japan's role in the Indo-Pacific region. Frank, thank you for joining us. It's midnight for you, so your participation is even more appreciated. Today we have, to everybody in the room, today we have Frank Martin. Today we're going to talk about another interesting topic, which is Sensei to Senpai, mentoring and being mentored for success. And I believe that we're going to hear a lot of insights. And if you have questions or comments, of course, please feel free to join us up on stage so that we can have a conversation, a discussion after Frank is done with the briefing. Without any further ado, Frank, I'm giving you the mic, so please go ahead and let us know your thoughts on the topic.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be back after only a few weeks. So let me introduce myself. Although I'm a long way away, so I was in Japan a few weeks ago, but I'm based in lovely Budapest. So as Maya said, it's midnight for us here. I'm Hungarian by birth, and still during the Cold War days, my mother, grandmother, and I escaped from behind the Iron Curtain, and we were refugees in Italy for more than a year. And then we were immigrants to the United States. And so that's where I was educated. I grew up mainly as a typical American kid, although I spent a lot of my summers back in Central Europe behind the Iron Curtain. So that was something that's different. And immediately when I finished university is when the Cold War ended. So I picked up my diploma, I got married, and my new wife and I came back to Central Europe. And we really, I was raised as a third culture kid, and we've been third culture adults, and now raised a third culture daughter ourselves. So we've lived in 5 different countries, although I've done work in many others. And my background is in international partnerships. I spent exactly half of my career working with large financial services companies, and the other half with engineering services companies, but doing the same job. So whenever they decided that they wanted a partnership or they wanted a company in a given country they didn't exist before, I'm the one who would get on the plane first and go and start the company from scratch and make sure that we could recruit better, we could retain people better. We had better relationship with the local regulators and our local partners, all because we understood them as a culture better than our competition did. So that's what I was responsible for. So I'm happy to talk about the subject because it's something that's very near and dear to my heart. Mainly because not only I feel I was mentored my entire life by the 2 Iron ladies who raised me, but also I was incredibly fortunate to come out of university at a very exciting time. So the world was changing. Talent from all over the world was flooding into Central and Eastern Europe. And I was absolutely blessed to be mentored in the first 10 years of my career by 2 unbelievable individuals. And, I'll speak a little bit about them and about what I got out of it, what they got out of it. Some different mentoring experiences in different parts of the world, but I'll focus mostly on Japan. And then at the end, I'm happy to take any questions you have. So first of all, the word sensei is tossed around an awful lot. Sometimes certain words tend to lose their meaning when they're used so much, like green or sustainable or something. So a sensei, as you know better than I, those who are in Japan, is really a reference to somebody who is a teacher. You can be a conversational English teacher, or or a master at Aikido, or 100 other things, and your students will refer to you as sensei because that's really a title. So that's the first step. If you look at the words linguistically and what they mean, their connotation as well. But really what you want to be, if you want to nurture individuals to get the best out of themselves and the best out of situations, is more of what the Japanese refer to as a senpai. And senpai is a word always used from the point of view of one of the people being taught. And it also has a connotation about a certain desirability to be associated with you, so that there is an understanding that you have a set of skills that people want to know and can use for their own betterment, for the betterment of the team. So it's all about really being a senpai, so someone who is recognized for being able to transfer skills and knowledge rather than being a sensei, which is really a title. So, as I said, at 24, out of university and dropped in the middle of Central Europe, where everything was starting from zero, politically, intellectually, financially, governmentally, the entire universe was new. I was very, very fortunate to be mentored for 10 years by two individuals where if you just look at their resumes, it's almost otherworldly. One of them played football at the United States Naval Academy, led troops in combat, taught at the Naval Academy, built companies all over the world by the time I met him. So, I thought I had a lot of answers. At 24, I was already well educated. I lived in multiple countries. I spoke a couple of languages. I had received a prestigious fellowship, so I sort of thought I knew it all. And then to run into someone like this, I wouldn't say it was a humbling experience, but it definitely showed me that although perhaps in my lifetime, or I'd already lived two ordinary lifetimes, but there was a lot of people out there who have lived five, eight, or 10 lifetimes. The second one was an individual who survived the horrors of the Second World War, became a doctor after the Second World War, ran a UN-funded hospital in the middle of the civil war in the Congo, was captured by the rebels, was released, and eventually became one of the experts in building medical systems to make sure they're accessible for the vast majority of the population. Was one of the experts globally for this. So these are the people from whom I learned. And I think one thing that we have to recognize when we talk about mentoring is that, what are these mentors going to get out of it? Sure, they're doing it for the joy of passing on what they know and seeing their proteges become successful, but these are still in business situations. So, they had not sort of semi-retired and were now professors somewhere. They were in business, they had KPIs to meet, and they saw me as somebody who could help them meet those goals and help them build the organizations because we meshed very well personality wise. And I had a few personality traits that they didn't have, although they had so many more skills than I had. So to really have an effective relationship as a mentor and a mentee or a protege, whatever word you want to use, you have to recognize that both sides are going to get something out of the transaction. And I think part of that was the fact that they saw things in me which I did not see yet, but they also recognized the fact that I knew that I did not know it all, that I knew that no matter what experiences I had, they had more. And skills, when you're talking about interpersonal relationships, communication, differentiation, working with other cultures, they are all skills to be learned and repeated over and over until they become sort of muscle memory, just as if we're talking about learning physical skills. And I think they recognized immediately in my eyes that I had a desire to learn and I knew that I didn't know it all. And I think that's a big deal. And it may sound a little cliche, but especially in the modern world where information is cheap, you can dig around and get information and data almost anywhere you want. People have this tendency to believe that they know everything that there is to know, regardless of age, regardless of experience. And you see it over and over, where a couple of years ago, the leaders of, for example, Theranos, were putting quotes all over LinkedIn and were saying things which just, everyone should have known that these people didn't know what they were talking about. I mean, how can anyone say the famous quote that, well, you shouldn't have a plan B because that means you're not committed to plan A? I think that's just the worst kind of jargon, and it shows that they didn't know what they were talking about, that they didn't understand themselves. So that's what the first way I approach it is what is the relationship going to give to both parties. But you really have to understand about mentoring in different cultures. And during my last discussion, we used examples from Russia and from Japan, and I'll use a few of those today. But when we think of mentoring in the West, sort of the Amero, European perspective, it usually means some experienced, older white guy talking a lot about what he knows and in a classroom setting where he is doing sort of 95% of the talking. Whereas if we move to Asia and especially Japan, mentoring is much more of a process where someone watches and learns and works extremely hard, repeating and practicing what they just learned. So the mentors are not as verbose, and that's actually a bad thing if you consider yourself a mentor and you consider yourself a business leader and you do an awful lot of talking and you dominate the conversation and you don't ask for other people's input. And mentors in the modern world, because facts are more available than they were a few years ago. The internet is out there. There are services out there which will get you almost any batch of facts you need. Mentoring now is more about skills on what to do with those facts, on how to put together plans, on how to communicate across cultures, on how to create a business plan that's accurate, not just detailed. These are all skills rather than just the interpretation of facts. So to jump right into it, first I'll speak sort of from the mentoring side, and then we'll conclude from the side of what people should be looking at if they're being mentored. So the first step, I think, for anyone who wants to pass down what they know, who wants to learn more, who wants to have quality teams around them which are better all of the time, and who may someday have people that they mentored know more about the given subject than they do, the first thing you need to do is know yourself. Because again, I find that many times people are convinced that they're a certain personality type, or they're convinced that they're good conversationalists, or good cooks, or good whatever, and that's really not the case. So, simplistically, when it comes to know yourself, one of the first things that people used to do traditionally is if you worked for a company, they would sit you down and you would do some sort of a personality assessment, a Myers-Briggs test, or one of the other hundreds that are out there that are available. And one of the first things they tell you is that you may not have an accurate representation in your own mind about who you are, how you communicate, and how you work together with other personality types. So the first thing you should do after you take this test is go home and ask your best friend or your spouse or your parent, is the way I view myself really how I come off? And you would be surprised how many times people get it wrong. So in terms of those personality types, are you an analytical? Are you a driver? Are you an amiable? Are you expressive? Everyone in business likes to think of themselves as a driver expressive, that especially again in the European and North American business world. But that's, really, you may be surprised if you ask people who know you very well about where you fall in this. It may be quite different than what you think. And in terms of being a mentor, the key is not to be able to draw people from those other squares to your way of thinking if you happen to be, let's say, an analytical. The key to being a mentor is being able to step into the other people's square and to be able to communicate with them as a driver wants to be communicated with, or an amiable wants to be communicated with, or an expressive. So it's all about knowing where you are in that scale in reality, and then being able to step into other personality types and work with them, because the transfer of skills, someone can learn that skill as good or better than you know it, but you have to be able to communicate to them in their respective language, intellectually speaking. And the second thing is to know your audience as well. So in terms of culturally, linguistically, desire-wise, I heard from a professor at INSEAD once that he loved having Japanese students in his courses because they took notes very diligently. They all did very well, and they never asked a single question. And that's one thing. If you're going to mentor in Japan, you need to know how to be able to engage people, not only in their language and in their mentality, their personality type, but how to draw out those questions which they have. And you can't just do it like many times Western mentors are sort of cheerleaders, and you get people excited, and you look at them and say, "We're going to go do it. Do you know the skill? Yes. Okay, go." And then they go out, and maybe they do it, and maybe they don't. So in Japan, it's much more of a process of finding that the set of skills that you need to give, being able to communicate with the people about, have they really understood what you have said? So there's a lot of classification of the people you're working with into, are they successful and do they have a good attitude? Now, the ideal is obviously to work with successful people who have great attitudes, but you can also do a lot mentoring people who have a great attitude, but for some reason have been unsuccessful, because that kind of person usually comes down to an understanding of skills. And on the other side, there are people who are successful, but don't necessarily have a good attitude. And that kind of mentoring involves more, interpersonal communication and finding out what is at the root of that person's poor view of what they're doing. Because if you can change that, you automatically get someone who very quickly has a good attitude and is successful, and therefore brings sort of orders of magnitude more benefit to the company or to the team that you're working with, right? So if the people out there, listening, aren't familiar with these kind of like the Myers-Briggs tests, there are versions online which you can take in 20 minutes, and then there are classroom versions which take 2 days. And it was a big learning experience for me when I was first in Asia, based in Singapore, with my team taking one of these tests and realizing when we plotted each other on the chart, all of my Singaporean colleagues were all on one side of that chart, and there was my dot on the opposite side of the chart, and I had to figure out how I was going to communicate best and being able to mentor team leaders and the unit managers that were working for them who were in my team, not in my language, but in theirs. And then the third as a mentor is again to know your location. So in terms of the size of the company, what is the team that you're supposed to complement as a mentor and grow? What do they know? Because they likely know some things that you don't know that you're going to be able to use in that location, especially when we're speaking internationally, and how you're going to be able to work with them to maximize what you know and be able to transfer those skills. So, some examples of that from, for example, in Russia, we were literally moved to Russia just a matter of weeks after the Russian Federation came into being. And I found it interesting because it said, okay, you're going to have to mentor a lot of these very, very talented, very, very smart people who who don't have an idea yet about what a free market economy is going to be like and what building a company is going to be like and a team and leading them successfully. But that was a mentoring example where literally they're asking, how tall are you? How deep is your voice? How long can you speak without being tired? And it was a type of a country where we went out and we did a lot of talking and a lot of communicating, and we led from the front and we demonstrated, and then the teams went out and did them en masse. Whereas in Japan, the mentoring examples I've had there have been very, very small groups. So either one-on-one or with small groups, and variety of ages, but being able to sit down with them and find out what they know, how best to complement what you know, how best to complement that, excuse me, with what you know, and then how to be a good mentor from that point of view. And what that usually means is a much different style of mentoring. So just a couple of days ago, I saw a television program where there was a Japanese master, and he was saying he actually disliked the word talent because he thought that anyone with the right attitude and with the desire to learn can be talented, period. He said, talent is not anything that's natural. And the way he did it was a minimum of talking. He wanted to be able to transfer those skills by showing. But he used a technique which we sort of refer to in business as you tell, you show, you do, and then you review. So you tell the person that you're working with, what you're about to skill you're about to impart with them. Then you show them that skill. So whether it's putting together a budget, whether it's interpersonal communications, whether it's communicating across cultures, you demonstrate it to them by you doing it. And then you have your protege do it as well. And then you review the process and you go absolutely back to the beginning. You tell them again what you're going to do in specifics. You show them by you doing it. Then you have them do it, and then you review the process. So it's very much more hands-on, and it perhaps is more time consuming, but it's not about you simply giving the instructions to a large group of people, sending them forth into the market, with that particular task, and then grading them at the end. It's much more you working with them individually. They watch how you do it. They can watch your body language. They can watch when you lean forward and lean back. They can watch as you put together a discussion to work, let's say, between companies from two different nations, and how you structure that that discussion, what you say when, and when you show visual materials, etc. Then you allow them to do it. And when you allow them to do it, you give them positive and negative examples of what they did. And then you keep cycling through that process until that person then develops that, again, that muscle memory. And you demonstrate that talent, and then you also show a bit of humility. I found and this was mentioned by Tim in the last discussion as well. And the way to do that is that as they're going through the learning process, you bring them into the discussion, not having them just watch you. And there are certain ways to do that, but just by recognizing, hey, you know this subject just as well as I do. Now it's time to practice. Or again, a lot of Japanese, and we talk about that Myers-Briggs test, they believe that they're, let's say, driver analyticals. That they think very analytically, but there are self-motivated drivers. But in reality, what I found is that, yes, the Japanese are very analytical, but they tend to have an extremely strong desire to be successful within a group for the long term. And that's more of an amiable. So you need to speak differently to a person with an amiable personality based on their desires and what they want for the long term than a driver. A driver you can speak to in sort of short machine gun phrases and orders, whereas an amiable, it's all about more what they feel. How's the group going to benefit from this? How's the company going to benefit from this when they learn these skills? And then as a mentor, you can still differentiate yourself by interest in your protege's long-term planning, in demonstrating some kind of kindness. And in one thing I absolutely stay away from is I try to use no jargon or sort of modern yoga babble in my discussions with people. I want to speak to them very directly, and you're never going to hear, the words, ecosystem or infrastructure or hack, more than once out of my mouth in a conversation over the course of a day. And I encourage anyone who's looking for a mentor that if they hear a lot of those words, they probably should not walk, they should run to the exit. Because everyone thinks they know all these skills because there's an internet and there's websites to help you do that, but that's simply not the case. So it's much more about being understated, by demonstrating what you know by showing it, by proving that you know it, rather than by speaking about it, and then taking an interest in the well-being of that team and the person that you're mentoring. And if I want to flip the script in terms of being someone who's being mentored, first of all, I think that this is something which has gone out of sort of the business language because people think, wow, there's sort of age restrictions in terms of of your skills, but you just cannot forget that, especially when it comes to business and doing something different and innovating. Innovating is in itself a learned behavior. It's not something that you sort of learn by osmosis. And when people have been in 4, 5, 6 countries, in some of them which are working well economically and some of which are in terrible recessions or in various levels of development, that kind of muscle memory when it comes to working successfully with people and organizations is absolutely invaluable. So I would encourage anyone who is interested in becoming better and to constantly push that glass ceiling up and to be recognizably better to find a mentor. And when you're choosing a mentor, I think you need to scratch the surface a little bit because there are people out there who have 25 years of experience, making swords or building companies or making perfect ramen, right? But do they really? You need to find out if that person really has 25 years of experience, or do they have 1 year times 25 of experience? That is not the same thing. So when people have done a variety of things in their trade or their chosen vocation, when they've gone all the way through the process of all the different steps of making the ramen, or 5 or 6 different roles within building organizations, those are the people that you really want to be with, and those are the people you want to listen to. And then there has to be a recognition in yourself that this is going to be a commitment in time. I was shocked about a year ago when I just looked at a random LinkedIn post and someone had asked the question of the group that, is it bad if I join companies and I leave them after only 90 days because I haven't found my passion yet? And of course, sort of 99% of the people who replied sort of patted them on the head and said, oh, of course, after 90 days, if you don't have your passion, it's no big deal if you're in your CV, we see all these 90-day assignments. And I think that's absolutely madness, and it's empirically untrue. After 90 days, no matter how smart you are, and I think back to my first 90 days in my first jobs, you barely know where the water cooler is, or where the washrooms are. You barely know the names of your staff members. It comes down to a commitment and time from you if you want to be mentored, because that mentor is going to see that commitment in your eyes if it's there, or not, right? And if it's not there, what are they going to get out of a working relationship with you? And then if you found that mentor, you need to look at your time with them. If you think you're going to have a year or 2 years, I was blessed with my first mentor. We worked together over 7 years in 3 different countries. That's very, very rare. Usually you're going to work together with somebody in the business world 1 or 2 or 3 years, and that's it. But you need to, as someone who needs to be mentored, first to have a choice. Is that the person you want to work with in that company, in that role? Yes or no? And it's just like committing to anything. If somebody you're dating sees this constant lack of commitment in your eyes, how much commitment can they give you in return? And believe me, a good mentor is going to see in your eyes how committed you are to that relationship. The second thing is to sit down with your mentor and create a goal, right? Create what is going to be the goal of this working relationship. And because if it's unstated, if it's simply something very ethereal, like, well, to get better, that's I don't think that's enough. The third thing is to make a decision and to learn a lot, as I mentioned, about that particular trade, that vocation, that company, and that mentor individually. So is this the surroundings you actually want to be in or not? Yes or no. The fourth is then to learn, because that person is going to be transferring these skills onto you. So you need to be paying attention, and you need to practice them, in repetition. And then the last is to work very hard. So, especially in Japan, where one of the business mottos is the same as a motto if you're learning a martial art, about 1,000 days of learning and 10,000 days of practice. Well, that's what it really should be for you. And then really after that, it's on you. I quote either very popular or very unpopular, depending on what side of the political divide you fall on. But Thomas Sowell, former U.S. professor, author, philosopher, he said very clearly that learning is not something that can be given. It's the student, or in this case, the mentee, that either acquires it or fails to acquire it. Right? So if that person is teaching you these skills, then it's up to you to work incredibly hard to make those things happen. And then don't buy into that philosophy that really your success is going to be driven by external forces. A lot of people in the modern world believe that if something good happens to them, it's because of something they did. But if something bad happens to them, if they're unsuccessful, it's because of sort of external forces. And this is one of the things that working with a mentor will really dissuade you of, because you will see that in life or in business, you don't have to be perfect. But if you know those skills and you practice those skills, 3 steps forward, 1 step back is perfectly acceptable. And I don't know of a single mentor who is going to get every single decision right, and I will admit that very freely. I think I have a good, I know what I know very well, but I'm not arrogant to think that out of 5 decisions, I'm going to get more than 3 or 4 of them right. And this is something that you need to go out and practice and need to have as a philosophy. So when you're learning, it should be one of those things where you realize you set those milestones for yourself that you've talked over with your mentor, and you will know when you reach them. And be ready to hear some feedback from your mentor, which is not necessarily easy to hear, right? So they're going to come back to you with constructive criticism. They're going to come back to you with suggestions, and you have to be willing to accept those. And I was, after 4 years in my career, I was with a terrific company. I'd become successful. I had developed a reputation within the company, and then suddenly I was in a role where I didn't get along with my immediate superior. And so I went to my mentors and said, explained to them the situation. And the advice they gave me was a bitter pill, but it taught me a lot. They sat me down and said, who do you think you are that you were going to go through your entire career working with only people you like? And I sat down and I felt incredibly stupid. And I said, you're absolutely right. And they advised me how to go about things, how to communicate better, how to continue to prove what I'm doing day to day. And you need to be ready as a mentee to accept suggestions like that, even though they're not necessarily popular in the modern age, because it's all about the individual, right? And who is that person to teach me or to have a different opinion? Well, they are people who have learned to communicate, learned to be successful in a variety of environments, in a variety of situations, and that's exactly the kind of person you want to be learning from. Right. So I think I've gone 5 minutes over our usual 30-minute discussion period. So thanks for everyone who's listening, and I'm very happy to discuss anything about what we talked about in terms of being a mentor or being mentored, or about any of the specific countries or geographies we discussed, and what are some of the things that are successful and unsuccessful to reach. I leave the floor open to anyone who wants to bring it up. Thanks again.
Thank you, Frank. Well, that was great, really, and I could. Yes, I found actually quite a lot of points that I think are very, very important. The points you made, because I also went through a mentorship, let's say, period. So when I was mentored by a colleague of mine who was yeah, who was much more experienced than me, and I could see all the points that you mentioned in in the first 30 minutes here. They were all there. Of course, it's very important that we stay humble and we don't think that we know it all. I totally agree with you, and that's even much more important here in Japan. But also, one of the points resonated very strongly with me, and it's the point about the skills that you bring to the table, so that your mentor actually doesn't have them, but they want to they want to make use of your skills while they actually help you learn more and help you move up. So this was really a great point, and I'm sure that for other people there, there have been other things that have resonated with them. So thank you very much for making this list of let's say, once again, points, and it's really amazing to have them all together here.
Yes, thank you very much. I mean, I think um, it is a relationship. It is not a classroom relationship. It is a personal relationship. And my first mentor, I think it was very very clear. He was much later in his career than I was. He had these skills which he wanted to give, but he still, he was not retired, so he wanted to be successful. And what he saw in me was someone who can learn what he knows, but he also very very specifically, because we were dealing with recruiting and training and leading large groups of people, he needed somebody to be the occasional bad cop, because he wanted to be the good cop all the time late in his career. That's one of the things he saw in me. And people are going to see some complementary aspects to any mentor mentee relationship, especially in the business world. This isn't the Red Cross, this isn't the UN. We're working for joint stock companies, and we need to hit those profit numbers. And it works together when you have complementary skills. And I still love working with people who I mentor, and finding that skill that really is at the top of their skill pyramid, and being able to develop that with them in a way where I always end up learning something, and they complement my skills, and so we're much better as a team than we would have been individually.
Yes, indeed. Great.
Just
Yes.
yeah, just some observations. Yeah, all my mentors have been either Americans or Japanese, and completely different styles. Um, and even within the if I look at my Japanese mentors, one of the things I used to tell people is you either get a crazy samurai or a wizened Zen master. There's like two types of mentors that I've had, and unlike my American mentors, the American mentors would spend a lot of time educating you, giving you background, giving you the big picture information, and then kind of letting you go at a certain point. And of course, you go back and you consult with them. My Japanese mentors were very experiential based. And quite often, I wouldn't be given background information. And so, there's pros and cons. But as a matter of style, if you're not used to that, you got to get used to quickly getting thrown into the deep end of the pool. And I'll give you an extreme example. So one of my mentors, I joined a Japanese manufacturing consulting company, and I had been there like 2 weeks. And he says to me, oh, by the way, next week we have a new client and they want to learn about 5S, Seidi, Seiton, Seiketsu, how to organize your plant. And he goes, you're going to teach the course next week, next Monday. So you better hit the books and learn how to teach it. So I had to go in there. I had to learn all this stuff in a short period of time and then go in and pretend that I was an expert on 5S. But being thrown into the deep end had its benefits. For one, it builds confidence and it pushes you. But as an American, I crave the big picture information. And then the other point that struck me as difference is my American mentors tended to be more, what's the word? Positive reinforcement. And I'm not even sure there's a proper Japanese word to say that, because the Japanese tend to be negative, and it's with good intentions. They're focusing on your weaknesses so you can improve them. The whole Kaizen mentality. And that's where humility really comes in handy, because it can be humbling. And if and by the way, one of the interesting things I found is often Americans say, "Oh man, my boss, he hates me. He's picking on me." And many times with certain old school managers, they actually pick on the people that they have the highest hopes for. And you're really in trouble if they just ignore you. That means they've kind of given up on you. So again, that takes some adjustment culturally if you're not aware of that. And then the last thing that just kind of jumped out at me is Japanese tend to be micromanagers. And, if you've never heard the expression, I think most people in the audience know it. It's Hodenso, Hokoku Renraku Sodan. And it's an acronym, and it sounds like the word spinach, and it's just easy to remember. But it basically means, you consult and you touch base on a regular basis with your Japanese boss. For example, if he gives you an assignment. And often my Japanese mentors would say, if I tell you to do one, it means I want you to do 10. And what they mean is they expect you as the subordinate to take initiative, but they don't want you to finish it and go all the way to 10 without going back to them. So what they really want is they tell you to do one, you do 1, 2, 3, you go back, show them what you did. They pull out the red pen, tell you everything you did wrong. Then you go fix it and you do 4, 5, 6, you go back, the red pen comes out. And one of the motivations for them being so, how would I say, just micromanaging, is because in Japan, the responsibility rolls uphill. And yes, if you screw up, the Japanese boss might scold you, but in the end, he can't blame his subordinates for mistakes, because the subordinates' mistakes are the manager's mistakes, right? So I use Horenso rather than viewing it as micromanagement. I viewed it as a way to manage my boss and to build trust and to nurture better communication, which is even more important when you're dealing across the culture gap, because Japanese aren't very good at verbalizing their expectations. And so you almost have to go back on a regular basis and pull those teeth, right? So I value all my mentors, both Americans and Japanese, but it took a huge adjustment for me, even someone who had been in Japan for a very long time, to take to their style. And even as I mentioned, there were different styles: the softer, wizened Zen master versus the crazy samurai. So just some comments off the top of my head.
Yeah, I think it's very important what you mentioned in terms of the pressure as well. The pressure cooker is pretty useful. You develop your skills when there's a certain amount of constant pressure that's on you. It's the same, physically. You're building muscle. You're building stamina after you're already warmed up and you're already starting to feel a bit fatigued and you're pushing. And it's the same with communication skills and business skills. How many of those meetings are you having a day? How many people are you communicating with? How many different cultures are you communicating with? All of that pressure is actually positive. Now you don't want it to obviously to be at the point where it explodes, but pressure really helps learning. And it's the job of a mentor to make sure that it doesn't get to be too much, it's just enough. But it's also the job of the person, the role of the person being mentored to understand that. And that the pressure is not the person picking on them. It's, as you say, the person having high expectations of you and wanting you to learn how to be successful when the sun shines or when the sun's not shining, and the economic indicators are moving up and or down. That kind of pressure is what builds that kind of success.
And yes, and there's another point you touched on that is near and dear to my heart, so I wanted to comment on it. You mentioned how, if somebody succeeds, they go, oh, that's because of my skills. And when they fail, they look for some external factors to, almost cast themselves as victims. And one of the things I strongly believe is there are true victims in the world. We all know that. But it doesn't do you any good, even if you are a legitimate victim, to cast yourself that way, because it means you've given up your personal agency and saying, "Oh, there's nothing I can do about it. I'm helpless." And I really like the fact that you brought that up. That's a really good point.
Sorry, Timothy, can I ask you a quick question?
Sure. Which Timothy?
So, sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Oh, Atami Timothy.
Of course.
So the Horenso, actually, I didn't know about this term. So are we supposed to do all these three things in this sequence?
Yeah, I mean, yes. So you just have to go. You just have to go check in with your boss. And one thing I did not mention though is the more you do it, the more your boss begins to trust you, and then they back off. That's what I found. I call it breaking in your Japanese boss, like you would break in a new pair of shoes. You have to show them. You want him to feel comfortable that he can trust you, and that if there's an issue, you're going to come to him before it gets out of hand. Anyway, that's how I found it. It was my way of managing the boss and getting him to back off. And usually it was a him, unfortunately.
Actually, I think it's important that, the subordinate need to manage the manager. But Frank, I have my question if I can.
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you. Again, thank you so much for the great session, another great session. So you talked about, this like a mentor and the mentee relationship. And then to me, am I echoing? Sorry. It's to me, giving feedbacks and then receiving feedbacks the toughest part of any relationships. I'm so horrible about receiving, especially constructive criticism. Do you have any like a suggestion? I have heard, they are sort of giving you feedback, not about your whole, human being. It's they're just, just pointing out how and where I can improve. I know all that, but I still it's very hard for me to receive a feedback. Do you have any pointer that you can share? Thank you.
Sure. I mean, I think first of all, like we discussed, the different ways to communicate with different personality types, right? And there's the information is out there, and you can look it up. But just briefly, the people who are on the top of that Myers-Briggs square, so the drivers and the analyticals, they're very fact-oriented. Whereas the people at the bottom part of that square, the amiables and the expressives, are very feeling-oriented, right? So even the way you would give constructive criticism to your mentee, if you know that they are a driver, is different than the way you would give it to an amiable. The words you use, whether you use a word like "do you see" or "do you feel," right? And then if you break that same square down to the left and the right, the ones on the right are speakers, and the ones on the left are listeners. So when you give constructive criticism to the ones who are speakers, because as soon as you start talking, they're going to want to start answering you, right? And why it happened this way. You need to structure that discussion with enough time to let them speak. Whereas the ones on the left, they want to hear all of it from you. So if you know where you are as a personality and you know where your mentee is, then you make that script according to their language it's going to get through to them. And in terms of receiving the criticism, I encountered this first when I went from Central Europe to Singapore. Whereas, Central Europeans, again, we've been all the way down from the Baltics to the Balkans and everything in between. We're a pretty hardy lot. because the 20th century wasn't always kind, to put it mildly. So you can criticize, a Hungarian can criticize another Hungarian, or a Pole, and people don't get upset at that. But when I went to Singapore, and my feedback as a manager the first couple of days was that, well, people don't want to hear when they're not doing well. And my response to that, my first question was, well, is that because then they assume they're always doing it correctly, or because they're just sensitive to criticism? And so, obviously it's not the former, because nobody, believes that they do everything correctly. It's just a type of sensitivity. So I had to learn to scale back everything from how I was speaking to my hand gestures to my leaning forward or leaning back. And it's all about those little skills that you put together, one on top of the other, on top of the other, which then make you better at giving a useful form of constructive criticism to your mentee. And in terms of taking it, well, none of us are teenagers, I think, on the call. So generally, I've always heard people's personalities stop developing after 24, 25 years old. So probably us taking it and liking it or not liking it is not going to change too much, anymore from now. So I think if you have respect for your mentor, that's where the key is. Because if you see the level of success and the level of communication, you're probably going to accept the constructive criticism much better. So it's probably about your belief in them, which is going to lead to you accepting it, in a better way.
That
I
was
was just,
great. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, because I'm just gonna jump. Yeah, no, that was great, right? I'm just thinking, maybe I was a Singaporean in my previous life because I'm sensitive. But but thank you so much, Frank. Sorry, Timothy.
no, that's all right. I was just going to say, I think it's normal to be hurt when somebody gives you feedback, especially if you didn't know that what you did wasn't as good as you thought it would. I mean, humans have egos, right? And to me personally, I think it's more about learning to embrace the pain of getting the negative feedback, knowing that you can get better. And a good example is I record a lot of music with a friend who is a much better musician, much better singer. And in the process of recording the music, he gives me negative feedback, and it hurts, but it always makes it a better recording, and it's made me a little bit of a better musician. So I think you have to learn to embrace the pain, because that's what growth is. And I can't say everybody's that way, but I think most humans have a little bit of that inside.
Yes, and I also think that by embracing the pain or learning to embrace it, actually, you become more reflective on on the world around you, and that's a very important feature, a trait that if you don't have, you actually cannot learn. So, Frank, in the beginning, you mentioned that it is important to actually be open to what is happening around you and actually think about it. And I think that's really the reflection that helps a lot. And everybody needs to learn to be reflective and to actually spend intentionally make some time to reflect after receiving feedback. And the feedback can be positive, it can be negative. Of course, the negative one hurts, and the positive one just makes you feel good. But in either case, it is really important to stop and intentionally spend some time on reflecting on that feedback and what you could have done better, or what actually was the problem, when the feedback was not good.
For sure. I mean, that we all have egos, as Tim said earlier. But it's healthy to have an ego. It's hubris, that's unhealthy. And I think your ego should be based on actual things which you have learned and actual things which you have done, because then it's very well earned, and more power to you. But unfortunately, a lot of people have egos because that's how they were raised, or that's the way that they were taught in school, or my ego was based on the successes that I had in business or in my personal relationships. And most of those successes were based on the fact that I was able to take constructive criticism from my mentors. Right. So if my ego would have been enough to just have me close my ears or close my mind, I wouldn't have been able to attain those things, which then gave me sort of the positive side of building your ego as an individual. Right. So use that criticism to build those accomplishments in those relationships that allow you to have a healthy ego.
Yes, indeed.
I was going to say, I want to give Ren a
Yes,
chance to speak,
exactly.
but I just have one quick comment. I want to plug a great book, and it's called Leadership and Self-Deception. And it focuses on both ends of the mentorship equation. But what was so brilliant about the book was how this mentor gives negative feedback. And basically what he does is he recounts his own screw-ups, his own mistakes. And by doing so, he inspires the mentee to reflect and to relate it to himself. And the point of the book is you can't make people change, but you can invite them to change. And how you present that information, if you do it with humility, and again, if you're focusing on your own mistakes and screw ups, it's much easier for people to take that feedback if they reflect and draw the conclusion themselves that, oh, wait a minute, this is where I've been falling short. And this book really opened new doors for me after I read it. And I can't say that about too many books. So that said,
I
Ren.
read that book and I forgot about it, but thank you for mentioning it.
Oh, great. Yeah. But go ahead, Ren.
Oh, hello everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hear
Yes.
me okay?
Yes.
Good. I'm in the car. So, hey, I thought this is a great topic, and then I wanted to share with you about the first company I had worked for, which was a Japanese company, Timothy Atami, and the founder of that company was loved and respected by everyone. But I never met him, so I don't know what's so great about this man. But one day I saw him being interviewed by NHK after he passed away. Um, there was something I thought I wanted to share with everyone because it's maybe interesting. The NHK was interviewing him about how he mentor his boys, his managers, and he mentioned that an employee who made a mistake and costed the company millions of dollars, and he was not happy about it, obviously, but he did not scorn, or he did not yell at him, or he did not say anything about him. But on the other hand, there was this employee who didn't do anything that was specific to the company's revenue or profit, but because of the way he treated the client, the customers, and he was very harsh in terms of trying to educate this employee like hours until he really understood it and then left. This story kind of remained in my heart for many years, because what I have learned from this, and maybe you guys can find some other areas to learn, but what I learned was I think the employees knew that he is upset about something that is not because of money. It's not because, oh, you lost so much money. Look what you did. We lost millions of dollars because of your mistake. It's not coming from that angle. What he told NHK was this employees already felt very sorry. He knew what mistakes he made, and my company will not collapse just because we lost a few millions of dollars. So I just let him go. But this employee, the other employee, the way his behavior or his value, his attitude does not represent our company's value, and it's not good for him, for his career. So he will make sure he understood. He will not let him out of his office until he fully can confirm that he understood it. So people will be able to understand that this founder is not coming from the revenue. He's really trying um, to educate you, not educate maybe for lack of a better term. I think
Train, maybe train.
train, yeah, train. Thank you. When the mentee feels that this man is talking to me because he is talking about something that he wants this to be good for me. That's when I think the magic moment happens. But if I feel like this manager is upset to me because I made him look bad, or that kind of way, then I think that equation kind of falls apart. Um, so this is my observation. I think to be a good mentor, you need to have, and I pay attention to this very much to my team, that I want to make sure he or she understands that I'm saying this for you, not for me. And if he thinks I'm too pushy, then that's fine. I'll back off. But if I don't make that very basic connection with the person I am trying to mentor, then I think nothing will work. So that's my view. I don't know if this is useful information. Maybe I'm preaching to the choir, but I thought I wanted to share this anecdote with everyone here. Thank you.
Hugely useful information. Thank you for that, because I think it's, especially in the business environment, profit or loss, if you're looking at it from terms of a mentor, profit or loss is a byproduct of the 50 or 100 or 500 steps that you did in selecting and training and mentoring and leading your team in the business environment. So this person was absolutely correct to say that, sometimes we're going to win, sometimes we're going to lose, and I know we all feel bad when we lose, but he really jumped on the person who displayed a bad behavior, because it's those behaviors or skills which over the long term lead to all the profit or loss. And you occasionally you may have to replace some weak links, because behavior is something generally in mentoring you see behavior as something you either change it quite quickly and the people learn good behavior, or they'll never change, and then it's usually simpler to change the person rather than change the behavior. But it's absolutely true and accurate and impactful to do it that way, where you scold people or for bad behavior, or you reward people for good behavior, knowing that the profit or loss at the end of the day is going to be built on those foundations.
Thank you very much, Frank, for preparing and for being here, for letting us learn from you and your experience. It has been great. If you have a few words, please go ahead, and after that, we'll close the room.
Just thank you again for the experience. It's always wonderful to get together and meet new people and learn new things. And I'll look forward to the next room, where I'll do a lot more listening than speaking.
Thank you. Well, the one thing I can say as a conclusion to this room is stay open, stay humble, and learn. Thank you.
Thank you for coming and staying with us today. We will be on air next week on Thursday at 8 a.m. Japan time again, so join us. Until then, you can find us at japanexpertinsights.com and our YouTube channel, where we upload all the conversations on Japanese politics, business insights, and the role of Japan in the Indo-Pacific region. If you want to stay informed about our upcoming events, you can follow us on Clubhouse, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. Again, we're looking forward to your joining us next week. Until then, stay well and make the best of the day. See you.